The morning sun cut through the glass towers of downtown Manhattan, glinting off polished steel and tinted windows. Inside one of those buildings, sleek, modern, and humming with quiet ambition, a woman stepped out of a black town car without fanfare. She wore a simple navy suit, no flashy jewelry, no entourage, just her, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are. She walked toward the main entrance of Viridian Global's East Coast headquarters, a company she'd built from nothing over the past 15 years. What started as a two-person startup in a garage was now a global tech giant, with offices on 3 continents and billions in annual revenue. But today, she wasn't here as a figure on a magazine cover or a name on a stock ticker. She was here to see how things really ran when no one thought the boss was watching. The lobby was all marble floors, soft lighting, and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's annual rent. A reception desk stood near the center, manned by a young woman with perfectly coiffed hair and a headset perched on one ear. Her eyes flicked up as the visitor approached, then quickly back down to her screen, like she'd already decided this person wasn't worth her full attention. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, voice flat, not even looking up again. The woman stopped a few feet away. "I'm here for a meeting," she said evenly. "Name?" "Alexis Monroe." The receptionist typed something, frowned, then shook her head. "I don't see you on the schedule." "Are you with a vendor?" "HR said no walk-ins today." "I'm not with a vendor," Alexis replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm the CEO." That got a reaction, but not the one you'd expect. The receptionist let out a short, almost amused laugh. "Right, and I'm Beyoncé." She leaned back slightly, arms crossed. "Look, if you're not on the list, you'll have to wait outside. Security's been strict since last week." A security guard standing near the elevator shifted his weight, eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't say anything, but his posture said enough. "We've got our eye on you," Alexis didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice or flash an ID. She simply nodded, turned, and walked back toward the glass doors. But instead of leaving, she stepped just outside the entrance, under the building's overhang, and stood there, calm, observant, taking it all in. She watched people stream in and out, men in expensive suits who were greeted by name, women with designer bags who breezed past security without a second glance. No one questioned them. No one told them to wait. She saw how the receptionist smiled brightly at a man in a pinstripe suit moments after brushing her off, how the guard held the door open for him like he was royalty. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Not even close, but it still stung. Not because she needed validation, but because it reminded her how easily people make assumptions based on how someone looks, especially when that someone is a black woman in a space that still, in too many ways, acts like it wasn't built for her. She pulled out her phone, not to call anyone but to check the time, 9:17 a.m. She'd been standing outside for less than a minute, but it already felt like an eternity. Not out of impatience, she'd waited years for opportunities that never came until she created them herself, but out of disappointment. This was her company. These were her employees. And yet, in their eyes, she was just another person who didn't belong. She thought about walking away, letting it go. After all, she had a dozen other fires to put out today: board meetings, investor calls, product launches. But something held her there. Maybe it was the memory of her first job out of college, when she'd been asked to fetch coffee during a strategy meeting she'd prepared for, or the time a client assumed she was the assistant, not the founder, and handed her his coat. Those moments never really left you. They just settled deeper like stones in your pocket. So she waited, not because she had to, but because she wanted to see what would happen next. Inside, the receptionist had already forgotten about her. She was now laughing with a delivery guy, accepting a coffee with a wink. The security guard had relaxed again, scrolling on his phone. No alarms, no urgency. Just another Tuesday in a building that ran on hierarchy, appearances, and unspoken rules about who mattered. But Alexis knew something they didn't. She wasn't just visiting. She was auditing. And not the kind that involved spreadsheets and balance sheets, though those would come too. This was about culture, about respect, about whether the values she'd poured into this company actually lived in its hallways or just on its website. She glanced back through the glass, saw the sleek Viridian logo on the wall behind the reception desk, the same logo she'd sketched on a napkin during a late-night brainstorming session years ago. Back then, People told her the market was too crowded, that she didn't have the right background, that no one would take a young black woman seriously in deep tech. She'd proven them wrong. But proving them wrong once wasn't enough. You had to keep doing it, every day in every room, even when you owned the whole building. A breeze picked up, rustling the hem of her jacket. She adjusted her portfolio, feeling the weight of it, not just the documents inside, but everything it represented. Years of sleepless nights, missed birthdays, boardrooms where she was the only woman, the only person of color, the only one who'd ever had to fight twice as hard for half the credit. And yet, here she was, still standing, still building. She checked her watch again, 18 a.m. 1 minute had passed since she was told to wait outside. 1 minute. That's all it took for her to realize something had to change. And not just in this lobby, but in the entire leadership structure of this office, because if they couldn't recognize their own CEO, what else were they missing? Whose voices were they silencing without even noticing? Whose potential were they overlooking? Because they didn't fit the mold. She took a slow breath, squared her shoulders, and walked back inside. This time she didn't go to the front desk. Instead, she headed straight for the elevator bank, past the guard, past the receptionist who barely looked up. At the panel, she placed her thumb on the biometric scanner. A soft beep. The elevator doors slid open instantly. No keycard needed, no code. Just her fingerprint, registered in the system as the highest level executive clearance. The receptionist finally looked up, confused. "Hey, wait! You can't just..." But the doors closed before she could finish. As the elevator rose smoothly toward the executive floor, Alexis stared at her reflection in the polished metal. She didn't look angry. She looked resolved, because in 1 minute, she'd seen everything she needed to see, and in the next few hours, everything was about to change. The elevator doors opened onto the 28th floor with a soft chime. The air smelled faintly of espresso and lemon-scented cleaner. Clean, controlled, the kind of quiet that only exists in places where people are paid a lot to look busy, but say very little. Alexis stepped out, her heels clicking softly against the polished concrete floor. No one was at the small reception desk just outside the executive suite. That was unusual. Meetings must be running late. She walked past empty chairs and a wall of glass that looked out over the city skyline, then pushed open the heavy door to the main conference room without knocking. Inside, 8 people sat around a long table, laptops open, coffee cups half full, mid-discussion. Charts and quarterly projections glowed on the screen at the far end. The conversation stopped the second she walked in, not because they recognized her, but because they didn't. A man in a crisp white shirt and rolled-up sleeves blinked, then frowned slightly like he was trying to place her. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice edged with mild irritation, as if she'd interrupted something important. Alexis didn't answer right away. She just stood there, calm, letting the silence stretch. She watched their faces shift, from confusion to suspicion to dawning horror. One woman near the window gasped. Another dropped her pen. The man who'd spoken, tall, silver-haired, wearing a watch that probably cost more than a used car, turned pale. "Ms. Monroe," he finally stammered, pushing back from the table so fast his chair screeched. We weren't expecting you." Corporate didn't send any notice. "I know," Alexis said simply. That was the point. She walked slowly to the head of the table, the seat that, by unspoken rule, belonged to her, and set her portfolio down. No one moved. No one breathed. The room felt like it had shrunk. "I was downstairs about a minute ago," she continued, voice still quiet but every word landing like a stone in still water. "The receptionist told me to wait outside. Said I wasn't on the list." A few exchanged nervous glances. Someone cleared their throat. "You see," she went on, "I didn't come with my usual team. No assistants, no security, no advance call. I wanted to see what this place really feels like when no one's putting on a show." She paused, looked around the table, at the expensive suits, the designer glasses, the perfectly rehearsed expressions now crumbling into panic. "And what I saw," she said, "was that even in my own company, I can walk in and be treated like I don't belong." The man in the white shirt, clearly the leader of this group, tried to recover. That's completely unacceptable. I'll speak to HR immediately." The front desk staff clearly, "Don't blame the receptionist," Alexis cut in gently but firmly. She was just doing what she thought was right based on what she's been taught and what she's seen. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me, how many times have you all walked past someone in this building and assumed they were just staff? How many voices have you tuned out because they didn't sound like yours? How many good ideas got lost because the person sharing them didn't fit the picture in your head of who belongs in a room like this? No one answered. They couldn't. She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. The weight of her presence, the sheer fact that she owned every square inch of this space, every line of code Viridian had ever written, every dollar in its accounts, filled the room more than any shout ever could. I built this company, she said, because I believe technology should be built by all kinds of people, for all kinds of people, not just the ones who look like they've always had a seat at the table. She looked at the screen behind them, still showing graphs of revenue growth and market share. You're proud of these numbers, and you should be, but numbers don't tell the whole story. They don't show who's being left out, who's being ignored, who's working twice as hard just to be seen. One of the younger team members, a woman with tightly coiled hair and tired eyes, shifted in her seat. Alexis noticed. She'd seen that look before. The look of someone who's spoken up before and been talked over, or worse, told to tone it down. Do you know how many complaints HR has logged from employees in this office in the last year about being overlooked, disrespected, or assumed to be in the wrong place? Alexis asked. 23. And not one of them was escalated to this level. Not one. She let that sink in. You're in charge of this region, she said, looking at the man in the white shirt. But you're not leading. You're managing optics. You're keeping the machine running, but you've forgotten who it's supposed to serve. He opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Outside, the city buzzed on, oblivious. Inside, time seemed to slow. Alexis walked to the window, hands clasped behind her back. From up here, the world looked small, ordered, manageable. But she knew better. Real leadership wasn't about views from the top. It was about listening to the people on the ground. I didn't come here to fire anyone today, she said, turning back. I came to remind you why we're here at all. But then she added quietly, though if things don't change, really change, not just in policy but in practice, then maybe firings will be the least of your worries. She picked up her portfolio. Cancel your rest of the day's meetings. I want every department head in this building to gather in the main auditorium by 2 p.m. We're going to have a real conversation. No scripts, no spin, just truth. As she turned to leave, the woman with the coiled hair finally spoke, voice soft but clear. Ms. Monroe? Alexis paused at the door. Thank you, the woman said. Alexis gave a small nod. Not a smile, just acknowledgement. That one word meant more than any apology from the others ever could. Back in the hallway, she took a deep breath. Her heart was steady. She wasn't angry, not really. She was disappointed. Because this wasn't just about one rude receptionist or one tone-deaf leadership team. It was about a system that kept repeating the same mistakes, even in places that claimed to be progressive or inclusive. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick message to her chief of staff. Activate Project Clarity. Start with this office, then she headed for the stairs, not the elevator. She needed to move, to think, and maybe, just maybe, to talk to a few people on the lower floors who actually knew what was going on. As she walked down the stairwell, the sound of her footsteps echoed. Each step felt like a promise. This ends today because leadership wasn't about titles. It was about action. And she'd waited long enough. The quiet hum of the 28th floor office felt different now, tense like the air before a storm. Alexis didn't go back to the conference room. Instead, she walked down the hall to a small windowless room usually reserved for confidential calls. She closed the door, set her portfolio on the desk, and opened her laptop. Within seconds, she was logged into Viridian's internal HR and operations portal, access level, founder and CEO. No approvals needed. No gatekeepers. She typed in a few commands, pulled up personnel records, diversity reports, and internal complaint logs for the East Coast Division. What loaded on the screen wasn't just data, it was a story. And it wasn't a good one. Over the past 18 months, 23 formal complaints had been filed by employees in this very building. Most cited being spoken over in meetings, passed up for promotions despite strong performance reviews, or mistaken for janitorial or catering staff, even when wearing their Viridian ID badges. 8 of those complaints came from Black employees. 12 from women of color. Only 2 had resulted in any kind of follow-up. The rest? Marked resolved with a single line, discussed informally. Alexis scrolled further. She pulled up the leadership roster for the regional office. 28 people in senior roles, directors, VPs, heads of departments. Only 2 were black, 1 was Latino, 0 were black women. Yet the company's public website proudly displayed photos of diverse teams and quoted mission statements about belonging and equity. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. It wasn't that these leaders were evil. Most probably thought they were doing fine. They ran efficient teams, hit their targets, hosted the occasional inclusion lunch. But inclusion isn't a lunch. It's who gets listened to, who gets promoted, who feels safe speaking up. Her eyes landed on one file in particular, a complaint filed 6 months ago by the very receptionist who'd told her to wait outside. The woman had written that during a client visit, a senior manager asked her to bring coffee like you always do, even though she'd been promoted to front desk coordinator 2 months prior. When she corrected him politely, he laughed and said, "Don't get too big for your boots." She reported it. HR spoke to the manager. 2 weeks later, she was transferred to a satellite office with a 20% pay cut and no explanation. Alexis closed the file slowly. That wasn't just oversight. That was retaliation. And it happened under the watch of the very people who'd been sitting around that conference table, discussing profit margins like everything was fine. She opened another tab. Employee engagement survey results from last quarter. The numbers looked strong on the surface. 85% satisfaction, 78% would recommend Viridian as a great place to work. But when she filtered by race and gender, the picture changed. Black women scored 42%. Their top comment: "I love the work, but I'm tired of proving I belong here." That line hit her like a punch to the chest, because she knew that feeling. Not from years ago, but from this morning. Standing outside her own building, being told to wait like she was nobody, she stood up and walked to the window. The city stretched out below. Thousands of people going about their days, unaware of the quiet battles being fought in offices like this one. Battles not with shouting or drama, but with silence, with being ignored, with being made to feel small in spaces you helped build. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. It was the woman from the conference room, the one with the coiled hair and tired eyes. She held a tablet and looked nervous but determined. I wasn't sure if I should interrupt," she said, "but I saw you pulled the HR logs. I manage the internal culture team. I've been trying to get leadership to take these complaints seriously for months." Alexis gestured for her to sit. "Tell me what you've seen." The woman took a breath. "It's not just the complaints that get filed. It's the ones that never make it that far. People stop reporting because they don't think anything will change. They see others speak up and get sidelined, so they stay quiet. They do their jobs, they hit their goals, but they're emotionally checked out." She hesitated, then added, "Last year we had 3 black engineers leave within 6 weeks of each other. All gave the same reason in their exit interviews. I don't see a path forward here." But leadership wrote it off as market competition. Alexis nodded. "And the receptionist, the one downstairs this morning?" The woman's expression darkened. "She used to be part of our onboarding team. Sharp, organized, great with new hires. After her complaint, they moved her to the front desk permanently. Said it was better for her skill set, but everyone knew it was punishment." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. "You know," Alexis said quietly, "I started this company because I wanted to build something different, something where talent mattered more than your last name, your skin color, or how you dressed. But somewhere along the way, we stopped paying attention to the little things, the glances, the assumptions, the quiet exclusions. And those little things became big problems," the woman nodded. "Change starts at the top. But it has to be real. Not just posters on the wall. It will be real," Alexis said. "Starting today." She stood, walked to the whiteboard on the wall and picked up a marker. "I need you to help me. Pull together every piece of data. Complaints, turnover rates, promotion gaps, survey comments. Not just numbers. The stories behind them. I want to see the full picture before I make any decisions." The woman's eyes lit up. "You're really going to do something?" "I already am," Alexis said. "Because if we can't treat our own people with dignity, if we can't recognize our own CEO at the front door, then what are we even building?" She paused, then added, And find that receptionist. Tell her I'd like to speak with her after the all-hands meeting. The woman left with purpose in her step, like she finally had permission to do the work she'd been trying to do all along. Alone again, Alexis stared at the whiteboard. She drew a single line down the center. On one side, she wrote what we say we are. On the other, what we actually are. The gap between them was wide, but not unfixable. She thought about her early days, sleeping on a friend's couch, coding through the night, pitching to investors who told her idea was too niche. She'd fought so hard to get a seat at the table. Now she realized the real fight wasn't just getting there. It was making sure the table was big enough for everyone. Her phone buzzed. A message from her assistant. Auditorium ready. 127 employees confirmed for 2 p.m. She checked the time. 1:15. 45 minutes to decide the future of this office. But she already knew what had to happen. You can't fix a culture by tweaking policies alone. You have to change who holds power. And sometimes that means removing people who've grown comfortable in their blindness, even if they've been successful by old standards. She closed her laptop, straightened her jacket, and walked out the door. The hallway was quieter now. People moved quickly, eyes down, sensing something big was coming. Alexis didn't rush. She walked with the calm of someone who'd already made up her mind. Because 1 minute outside her own building had shown her everything, and now she was going to make sure no one in her company ever felt invisible again. The auditorium lights were bright, casting sharp shadows on the rows of chairs filled with employees from every level of the East Coast office. Some sat with arms crossed, others leaned forward, curious. A few whispered to each other, eyes darting toward the stage. No one knew exactly why they'd been called in so suddenly, but the tension was thick enough to taste. At exactly 2 p.m., the side door opened. She walked in alone. No podium, no notes, no entourage. Just her, in the same navy suit she'd worn that morning, standing at the center of the small stage. The room fell silent instantly. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. For a full minute, she said nothing. She just stood there, hands at her sides, looking out at the faces in front of her. Engineers, designers, support staff, managers, interns, people who coded the software, answered customer calls, cleaned the offices at night, kept the lights on. Her people. That minute stretched. Some shifted in their seats. Others stared back, steady and waiting. Then she spoke. 1 minute, she said. Voice clear and calm. Is all it took this morning for me to be told I didn't belong in my own company. A ripple went through the room. Murmurs. Glances exchanged. I walked into this building, she continued, dressed like I am now, carrying nothing but a folder. No badge visible. No announcement. And the receptionist, the same one many of you see every day, told me to wait outside. Said I wasn't on the list. She paused. She didn't recognize me. And honestly, I don't blame her. Because if the leadership of this office can't see the people who keep it running, how could she be expected to? She took a slow step forward. But here's what that 1 minute showed me. It's not just about me. It's about every person in this room who's ever been overlooked because of how they look, how they speak, or where they came from. It's about the engineer whose idea got credited to someone else, the coordinator who's always asked to take notes but never invited to lead, the new hire who walks in and feels like they have to shrink themselves just to fit in. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried, strong, steady, full of quiet fire. I read your complaints. I saw your survey responses. I looked at who gets promoted and who gets passed over. And I realized something painful. We've built a company that says all the right things, but doesn't always live them. She looked toward the back, where the regional leadership team sat, stiff, pale, eyes down. To the leaders in this room, she said gently but firmly, you've done a good job hitting targets. You've managed budgets, grown revenue, kept operations smooth, but leadership isn't just about numbers. It's about people. And somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing them. She let that sink in. Effective immediately, she announced. The entire regional executive team will be stepping down from their leadership roles. A collective gasp. Some people sat up straighter. Others covered their mouths. This isn't punishment, she clarified quickly. It's accountability. You'll be reassigned to individual contributor roles, still employed, still valued, but no longer in charge of teams or culture decisions. You'll go through a 6-week program on inclusive leadership, Unconscious bias and active listening. Only after that, and only if you demonstrate real change, will you be considered for leadership again. She looked at them directly. Because leading isn't a right, it's a responsibility, and it has to be earned. Not just once, but every single day. Then she turned back to the wider audience. But this isn't just about changing who's in charge. It's about changing how we operate. Starting next week, we're launching Project Clarity, a company-wide reset on how we treat each other. She outlined the changes simply. Monthly listening circles where frontline staff can speak directly to executives, no filters, no HR present unless requested. Promotion criteria will be published openly, so everyone knows what it takes to move up. Every manager will be evaluated not just on results, but on how their team feels, through anonymous peer and report feedback. And most importantly, every complaint about bias or disrespect will be investigated within 48 hours, with updates shared transparently. We're not perfect, she admitted, but we can be better, and we will be, because you deserve to work in a place where you're seen, heard, and valued for who you are. Then she did something unexpected. She walked off the stage and into the audience. She stopped near the front row, where the receptionist from that morning sat, eyes wide, hands clenched in her lap. You told me to wait outside, Alexis said softly, so only those nearby could hear, and you were doing your job. But I want you to know I saw you, and I see you now. The woman's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Alexis turned back to the room. This company belongs to all of us, not just the people at the top, not just the ones who look a certain way or talk a certain way, all of us. She walked slowly down the center aisle as she spoke, making eye contact with as many people as she could. I didn't build Viridian to create another corporate machine that grinds people down. I built it to prove that kindness and excellence can go hand in hand, that you can win in business without losing your humanity. She stopped near the back, where the woman from the culture team stood by the wall, arms crossed but smiling faintly. And I need your help, Alexis said, looking around. If you see something unfair, say something. If someone's being left out, pull them in. If a leader isn't listening, call them out, respectfully but firmly. Because culture isn't set by one person. It's built by all of us every day. She returned to the stage, not to end, but to invite. Starting tomorrow, I'll be sitting in on team meetings, not as the CEO, but as a listener. I'll be in the break room at lunch. I'll be reading every suggestion that comes in through the new feedback portal. This isn't a one-day fix, it's a new beginning. She looked at the clock on the wall. I've taken enough of your time. But before I go, thank you. Thank you for showing up even when it's hard. Thank you for caring enough to stay, even when you've felt invisible. That takes courage, and you're not invisible anymore. As she stepped away from the microphone, the room stayed silent for a beat. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the whole auditorium rose to their feet, not in wild cheers, but in something deeper. Respect. Relief. Hope. She didn't bow or wave. She just nodded, turned, and walked out the same way she came in. Alone. Calm, certain. Outside the auditorium, the hallway felt different. Lighter. People lingered, talking in small groups, faces animated, voices low but urgent. No one rushed back to their desks. They were connecting, sharing, breathing. Upstairs in the empty executive suite, the leadership team packed their personal items into boxes, quiet, thoughtful. No anger, just the heavy weight of realization. And down in the lobby, the receptionist straightened her Viridian lanyard, took a deep breath, and greeted the next person who walked in, not with suspicion, but with a warm "Good afternoon. How can I help you today?" Because everything had changed, not with a shout, not with drama, but with 1 minute of truth, and the courage to act on it. 6 weeks later, the same lobby that once felt cold and guarded now buzzed with a different kind of energy. The marble floors still gleamed. The abstract art still hung on the walls, but something intangible had shifted. People greeted each other by name, not just titles, but first names. Laughter spilled out from the break room. The reception desk was no longer a checkpoint, but a welcome station, where visitors were met with a smile and a clear explanation of where to go next. And behind that desk sat the same woman who, she once told the CEO to wait outside. Only now she wore a new badge, head of inclusive onboarding. Her job wasn't just to check IDs. It was to make sure every new hire, from intern to director, felt seen from day one. Upstairs, the changes ran even deeper. The executive floor no longer felt like a fortress. Glass walls stayed open. Meeting rooms had feedback boards where anyone could post anonymous thoughts after a session. And every Friday at noon, a rotating group of frontline employees sat down with senior leaders for lunch. No agenda, just conversation. The ripple had started with 1 minute. Now it was a wave. Applications for internal leadership programs had tripled, not because the roles paid more, though they did, but because people finally believed they had a real shot. For the first time, the list of candidates for department head roles reflected the full spectrum of the company. More women, more people of color, more voices that had once been quiet. One afternoon, Alexis walked into the downtown office again. This time not for an audit, but for a listening circle. She arrived early as usual, and instead of heading straight to the conference room, she stopped by the coffee station. A young engineer she'd never met before was pouring a cup. "Mind if I join you?" Alexis asked. The engineer blinked, then grinned. "Only if you promise not to fire me if I spill this on your shoes," they laughed. And just like that, the barrier was gone. Later in the circle, people spoke openly, about workload, about recognition, about moments they'd felt excluded or uplifted. No one held back, and Alexis didn't dominate the conversation. She listened, took notes, asked questions like what would help, and how can we do better. Afterward, as she walked toward the elevator, the woman who now led the culture team caught up to her. "You know," she said, "before that day I was updating my resume. I thought I'd have to leave to find a place that valued what I cared about." Alexis smiled. "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too," the woman said. "But it's not just me." Last month, 3 people who were planning to quit changed their minds. They said they finally feel like they belong. That was the real win, not the headlines, not the stock price, though that had risen steadily, but the quiet moments of trust being rebuilt, one conversation at a time. News of what happened in the East Coast office had spread far beyond the company. Other Viridian branches started their own clarity circles. Competitors took notice. Industry panels invited Alexis to speak, not just about tech or strategy, but about culture as a competitive advantage. But she always brought it back to people. Profit follows purpose, she'd say. And purpose starts with respect. At the next all-hands meeting, she announced something new, a culture champion program. Every team would elect one person, rotating every quarter, to represent their voice in leadership discussions. No extra pay, no fancy title, just a seat at the table. And so far, the volunteers had included a night shift support specialist, a junior designer, and a facilities coordinator who'd been with the company for 12 years. No one was too small to matter. Back in her own office, simple, uncluttered, with a view she rarely had time to enjoy, Alexis kept a single note taped to her monitor. It was a printout of an internal message from an employee she'd never met. "Today, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I had to hide who I am to do my job. Thank you." She read it every morning. One rainy Tuesday, she walked into another Viridian office, this one on the West Coast. She didn't announce herself. Just walked in like any other visitor. But this time, things were different. The security guard recognized her instantly, not from a photo, but from a company-wide video she'd recorded about psychological safety. He nodded respectfully. "Good to see you, Ms. Monroe. The team's been waiting." The receptionist stood up. "Your 10 a.m. is running 5 minutes late, but your coffee's ready. Black, 1 sugar, right?" Alexis raised an eyebrow. "You remembered?" "We all did," the receptionist said with a smile. "You said in your last town hall that little things matter, so we pay attention." As she walked toward the elevators, 2 young employees passed by, deep in conversation about a new feature launch. They didn't stop to gawk or whisper. They just nodded politely and kept talking, confident, engaged like they owned the place, because in a way, they did. Later that day, during a casual walkthrough of the design floor, Alexis paused by a whiteboard covered in sketches and sticky notes. One note at the top read, "What would make this feel human?" She smiled. That had been her mantra from day one. Now it was theirs too. On her flight back home, she scrolled through the latest employee survey results. The overall satisfaction score had jumped to 89%. But what caught her eye was the comment section. Dozens of messages, raw, honest, hopeful. My manager asked how I was doing and actually listened. I got promoted based on my work, not my network. I finally feel like I can bring my whole self to work. She closed her laptop and looked out the window at the clouds below. She thought about that morning 6 weeks ago, standing outside her own building, invisible in plain sight. It hurt then, but it also lit a fire. Because sometimes the most powerful leadership moments don't happen in boardrooms or press conferences. They happen in lobbies, in break rooms, in the quiet decision to believe someone when they say they don't feel seen, and then doing something about it. She wasn't just building a company anymore. She was helping build a community, one where success wasn't measured only in revenue but in respect, where leadership wasn't about power but about presence. And as the plane began its descent, she knew this was only the beginning, because real change doesn't happen in a day. It happens in minutes, like the minute she was told to wait outside, and in the minutes after, when she chose to stay, speak up, and stand for something bigger than herself. Now, others were doing the same, and that was the greatest return on investment she could ever ask for.